message at this gathering, this international cooperation gathering, as Egypt is on the precipice of another IMF bailout? What's your financial message this morning at this gathering? Good morning.
Good morning, Manas. Yes, this is the second edition of the Egypt International Cooperation Forum. And this year, it also hosts the ministers from Africa for finance, economy, and environment. And the key message is that access to finance, mobilization of resources for climate action is very, very urgent for the African continent. As you mentioned, yesterday there was an assembly of global policy leaders. We had the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Amina Mohammed, who has to do with finance and SDGs. We had John Kerry, we had Mark Carney, and of course the president of the EBRD and other financial multilateral development banks were represented as well. So it was a very important gathering. We will come out with a communique at the end of the conference on the 9th of September. And this is supposed to be a launch pad for Finance Day at COP. COP is less than 60 days away. And of course, being in Sharm el-Sheikh, being from Egypt, it's considered an African COP, the voice of the South.
And you and I were together in Singapore last year, and you made it very clear at the plenary session that the demands from the West or the DM markets for Africa were extreme, if I can paraphrase. My memory's not exact on the wording that we use. But you have an African Finance Day. You're going to host that. What are the demands? What's the size of the demands from the African nations and the developing nations as we go to this COP? Do you think they're going to up the demands, and what will they be?
So yes, you're absolutely right, Manas. When we were together in Singapore, the message was the expectation from Glasgow. There are trillions of dollars, pledges that have been made to finance climate action in different countries, developing and emerging, and of course, African countries. However, these pledges have not made their way to the ground. And we mentioned then that countries rated B and below may not have that access. So how can we create innovative financial tools, blending finance to be able to crowd in private investments into very important projects for climate, not just mitigation projects on the energy front, but also for food security and water security, which are known as adaptation projects. So this was a message very loud yesterday. We had, of course, both Secretary Kerry as well as Mark Carney, head of GFANZ, both trying to mobilize or crowding in private sector. The message was very clear. Also, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was there, mentioning the financing gap for Africa, in order to push the climate action. More than $800 billion required. How do we close that gap? How do we create investable projects? And therefore, this COP, the key theme is from pledges to implementation.
And part of that, I'm duty bound, of course, as you go to the IMF with the request. I know that you were the International Development and Cooperation Hub, Dr. Rania, but you talk about financing gap within the COP side, but from a nation state, you have an external funding gap. You talk to the World Bank. You are the linchpin to the World Bank. And are there active talks by you with the World Bank, let's say, for international financing or any form of support?
So absolutely, you know, Manas, that for IMF programs, the program has to be fully financed. And for that to occur, we also get financing from our bilateral partners. And as you mentioned, multilateral development banks such as the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, etc. Egypt has been able to mobilize this type of financing because this is also related not just to budget support, but also to project finance. And that's why yesterday we launched the Egypt Country Platform for the Nexus of Water, Food and Energy, which is the NWEFI program. NWEFI in Arabic means fulfilling promises. And hence our mobilization of financing from the multilateral development banks is in good course. And it is happening, both happened in 2020, 2021, and continuing in 2022.
And if I was to just push you a little bit, Dr. Rania, and say, are you hopeful that you will get additional complementary funding from EBRD or WB in conjunction? I know the IMF sits in another remit, but are you optimistic and in active talks to open additional financing, additional support for the country from those agencies?
So just last month, we were able to get budget support for 271 million from the African Development Bank and 500 million from the World Bank under food response. And also, there are other bilaterals that we're working with. So on that front, things are moving, very much in progress.